The courtroom was full that morning. Lawyers in black suits moved quickly from table to table. Phones buzzed, files shuffled. Everyone was busy, except for one person, a boy. He stood at the back of the courtroom. His hands were shaken. His shoes were torn. His shirt was clean but too small for him. His eyes were dark and tired, but not afraid. His name was Ibrahim. He was just 17 years old. People looked at him with confusion. Who is he? Someone whispered. A thief? Probably. Another one. Said Vi is a child here without a lawyer. An old lady asked. But Ibrahim didn't say a word. He just waited, holding a small brown file close to his chest. At the front of the room stood Mr. Blake, a tall white man in an expensive suit. He was one of the best attorneys in the city. Everyone knew him. He smiled with perfect white teeth and carried himself like he owned the court. When Mr. Blake saw Ibrahim standing alone, he laughed loudly. This is the case. This poor little thing, people chuckled. Where's your lawyer, boy? Mr. Blake asked. Or did your family sell your shoes to pay the court fees? More laughter. Ibrahim still said nothing. He slowly walked to the defense table and placed his file down. His hands were shaking, but his eyes stayed on Mr. Blake. Mr. Blake leaned toward the judge's chair, which was still empty, and said loudly, "This shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. One look at him, and we all know how this ends." In the audience, a few people began recording videos quietly. Ibrahim's silence was unusual. His calm was even stranger. Someone whispered, "What if he's not what he looks like?" Finally, the heavy wooden door opened. The judge entered the courtroom. He was tall, older, with gray hair and calm eyes. His nameplate read, Judge Armin Malik. Everyone stood up in respect. The judge sat down and looked around the room. Then his eyes stopped on Ibrahim. He blinked once, then twice. He leaned forward and looked closer. Then he asked in a low but firm voice, "Is this the boy from Sector 9? The one from the fire rescue?" The courtroom went silent. Mr. Blake frowned. "Excuse me, Your Honor. Fire rescue." The judge didn't respond to Blake. His eyes were still on Ibrahim. "I remember your face," he said softly. 3 winters ago, there was a fire in a residential building. A boy ran into the smoke and saved an old man who couldn't walk. That boy disappeared before we could thank him." Ibrahim nodded slowly. "That was me, sir," he said in a quiet voice. The audience gasped. Mr. Blake looked uncomfortable now. He tried to laugh. "Well, isn't that nice, a little hero? But we're here for legal matters, not bedtime stories." The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Blake, this boy may look weak, but I want to hear his side fully, without interruption." Ibrahim opened his file. Inside were only 3 things. A newspaper clipping with the headline, "Teenager Saves Lives in Fire, Leaves Without a Name." A photo of the burned building, showing Ibrahim carrying the old man. A handwritten note, old, faded, but still readable. He handed the note to the judge. Judge Malik read it silently. His eyes changed. His hand trembled just slightly. Then he looked at Ibrahim again. "You kept this all these years?" he asked. "Yes," Ibrahim said. "It was the only thank you I ever received. It meant everything to me." Double quotes. Mr. Blake rolled his eyes. "With all due respect, Your Honor, we still have a case to argue. He broke a shop window and stole electronics. That's why we're here." The judge turned to Mr. Blake slowly. "Are you sure?" he asked calmly. Double quotes. "Yes. The store owner has footage. He says the boy is guilty." Ibrahim spoke up. "I didn't steal. I was running after someone who did." The judge paused, then said, "Let's play the full footage, not the clipped version your office sent." Mr. Blake's face changed slightly. I didn't know there was more footage." The judge nodded at the clerk. Within minutes, the full video played on the large screen in the courtroom, and what it showed changed everything. In the video, a man in a black hoodie smashes the store window and grabs electronics. Ibrahim, walking nearby, sees him. He runs after him. The man throws one box at Ibrahim and escapes. Then police arrive and arrest only Ibrahim, who is holding the box. Gasps filled the courtroom. Mr. Blake's mouth dropped open. One man stood up and said, "He was trying to help, not steal." Another person muttered, "That poor boy was blamed just because he looked poor." The judge banged his gavel. "Enough. I've seen all I need." He turned to Mr. Blake. "You mocked him, laughed at him, and told everyone he didn't belong here. But today, this court sees him for what he truly is. An honest, brave young man who stood alone and still chose the truth." He looked at Ibrahim and said softly, "You shouldn't be sitting in a courtroom defending yourself. You should be sitting in a classroom, building your future." Mr. Blake sat down, red-faced. He had no more words. The judge stood and said, "Case dismissed. Ibrahim, you're free to go." Then, after a pause, he added, "And if you're willing, I would like to sponsor your education. I believe this country needs more boys like you." The room broke into applause. People stood up. Ibrahim's eyes filled with tears. He didn't cry for pain. He cried for hope. The same boy everyone laughed at had just won the room with his silence, his truth, and his heart. Before Ibrahim became known in the courtroom, before the judge offered him respect, before people clapped for his name, he was just a quiet boy from the back streets of Sector 9, a place where the roads were broken, but the hearts were kind. Ibrahim's day always started early. He would wake up before sunrise in a one-room house with a leaky roof. His mother was sick and stayed in bed most days. His younger brother Sami had trouble walking and used an old wooden crutch. There was no father. Ibrahim, at just 14, was the man of the house. He never complained. Every morning he filled buckets of water, gave Sami tea, and stepped out into the dusty streets, not to go to school, but to work. He did everything he could find. Some days he helped at the tea stall. Other days he cleaned cars outside offices. Sometimes he carried heavy bricks at construction sites too heavy for a child. People often ignored him. Some were kind, but many looked down on him. Once, a man in a fancy car yelled, "Get away from my car. You'll scratch the paint with your dirty hands." Ibrahim didn't reply. He just smiled and moved on. But even in his hard life, Ibrahim always found ways to help others. If someone dropped their bag, he picked it up. If an old lady needed help crossing the street, he held her hand. If a child was crying, he shared his only roti. People in Sector 9 knew him not for his clothes or money, but for his kind heart. They called him Shota Farishta, the little angel. One winter evening, something happened that changed everything. Ibrahim was walking home after a long day. His hands were red from cold. He carried bread and medicine for his mother. As he passed Building 14, he smelled smoke. He looked up and saw it. Fire. Smoke was pouring from a window on the 3rd floor. People were running and screaming. Flames had reached the 2nd floor. Ibrahim dropped his bag and ran inside. "Get out, boy," a guard shouted. "You'll die in there." But Ibrahim didn't listen. He tied a wet cloth over his face and ran up the stairs. On the 2nd floor, he found a little girl crying. He lifted her in his arms and brought her down safely. He went back in. This time the smoke was worse. It burned his eyes. It made him cough. But he heard something. A weak voice from inside apartment 3B. "Help! Help me!" Ibrahim kicked the door. It opened with a loud crack. Inside, an old man lay on the floor, barely breathing. His walker had fallen. He couldn't move. Ibrahim lifted the man, heavy and gasping, and somehow carried him down all 3 floors. People stared in shock as he came out of the fire, eyes black with smoke, hands shaking. An ambulance took the old man, but before anyone could thank the boy, he disappeared. That night, Ibrahim sat beside his mother and brother. He didn't tell them what happened. He just said, "There was a lot of smoke on the road today." The next day, the newspaper carried the story. Unknown teen saves lives in Sector 9 fire, disappears without a name. There was a photo too, taken by a bystander. It showed a blurry image of Ibrahim carrying the old man out of the fire, but no one knew his name. Back in court, years later, Judge Arman Malik held that same photo in his hands. He had been the one saved that night. The old man was his father, and the boy in the picture was now the one being laughed at by a rich attorney. Fate had come full circle. Back in Sector 9, Ibrahim continued his quiet life. He still worked, still helped others. He never waited for reward, but his mother always told him, "Beta, the world may forget your face, but God never forgets your good." One day, when he turned 17, something terrible happened. His brother Sami was pushed by a man in the market and hurt badly. Ibrahim ran after the man to stop him. The man threw something in Ibrahim's hands, a box he had just stolen, and ran away. Police came and arrested Ibrahim. He tried to explain, but they didn't listen. The case was passed to a big law firm, and Mr. Blake, the white attorney, took it, thinking it would be an easy win. After all, Ibrahim was poor. No lawyer, no money, no voice. But what Mr. Blake didn't know was that truth needs no suit, no power, no loud words. Sometimes, it only needs silence and a strong heart. As the courtroom replayed the story, as the judge held that old newspaper clipping, as Ibrahim stood quietly, never once raising his voice, the world began to understand. He was not just a poor boy, was the street hero, and the truth about him had only just begun to rise. The courtroom was silent. After seeing the video footage and hearing the judge speak kindly to Ibrahim, the mood had changed. People no longer looked at him with doubt. Some even looked at him with respect. But Mr. Blake, the rich white attorney, wasn't ready to lose. He sat in his chair, red-faced, pretending to look calm, but inside, his anger was growing. How could a poor street boy suddenly become a hero in front of everyone? Mr. Blake had built his career by winning, and winning big. He was known for one thing, turning lies into truth, and truth into dust. He leaned over to his assistant and whispered, "It's time to use the real weapons." The assistant nodded and slid a folder across the table. Mr. Blake opened it slowly. Inside were printed sheets, black and white photos, and a list of names. These were Ibrahim's neighbors, old school records, and photos of him working on the street. Everything Blake could dig up in one night, but he didn't collect it for justice. He collected it to destroy Ibrahim's image. "Your Honor," Blake stood up and said, "before we continue, I would like to present additional information about the boy's background." Judge Malik raised an eyebrow. "Proceed, but stay relevant." "Oh, I will," Blake said with a fake smile. "Very relevant." He walked slowly to the center of the courtroom, holding one paper in the air. "This is a school report from 2 years ago, it shows that the boy was expelled for fighting another student. Ibrahim looked down. His jaw tightened. People in the room gasped. Blake continued, and here a photo of him cleaning cars outside a bar. That's not exactly the work of an honest young man, is it? A few people in the room started whispering again, but the judge didn't look impressed. Do you have any criminal record tied to these documents? He asked. No, Your Honor, Blake said quickly. But I believe they show a pattern of behavior. He turned to Ibrahim with a cold voice. You were kicked out of school? Caught fighting? Never returned? And spent your teen years on the street? What does that say about your character? Ibrahim stood up slowly. He looked at the judge, then at the audience. Then he said in a calm voice, May I explain? The judge nodded. Ibrahim spoke simply, with no anger. I fought in school because a boy made fun of my brother's leg. He called him broken trash. I told him to stop. He pushed me, so I pushed back. He paused. I was punished, yes, but I never hit first. He looked at the audience. And yes, I cleaned cars. I served tea. I worked in places most people avoid, but not because I was dishonest, because I was poor, because I had a sick mother and a hungry brother, because no one else would help us. A few people lowered their heads in shame. Mr. Blake tried to interrupt. That's a sweet story, but we are still in court. The judge raised his hand sharply. Let him finish. Ibrahim nodded. I may not wear a suit. I may not have a law degree, but I know what is right and what is wrong, and I know I didn't steal anything. He turned to Mr. Blake. I ran after the thief. The man dropped the stolen box in my hands. I picked it up to return it, but before I could explain, I was already in handcuffs. The courtroom went quiet. Again, Mr. Blake clenched his teeth. His strategy was failing. He had used his usual trick, digging up someone's past and twisting it. But it wasn't working this time. This boy wasn't breaking under pressure. He was standing stronger. Outside the courtroom, the media had already picked up the story. Street boy surprises court with truth. Attorney mocked teen now losing control of case. People started gathering around the courthouse. Everyone wanted to know, who is this boy standing alone against the system and not giving up? But Mr. Blake still had one more cruel card to play. He pulled out a printed paper and read aloud. Ibrahim's birth records are missing. No official ID until the age of 10. For all we know, this boy could be using a fake name. The crowd murmured again. Ibrahim's eyes widened. Even the judge looked surprised. Mr. Blake smiled sharply. That means, Your Honor, he might not even be who he says he is. Ibrahim stayed silent for a moment. Then he pulled out a small envelope. From his pocket, soft and folded at the edges, he opened it and handed it to the judge. Inside was a photo, a baby boy in a blanket, a small shelter card attached to the side. Found near Sector 9 railway station. 9:14 p.m., January 3rd. Judge Malik held the photo gently. That's the night of the train accident, he whispered. We searched for survivors. This baby was the last one found. Ibrahim nodded. That was me. I don't have a full past, but everything I do remember is honest. The courtroom was silent. Even Mr. Blake didn't speak for once. Because, at that moment, everyone understood. This wasn't just a court case. It was a battle between arrogance and truth. Between a boy with nothing to hide and a lawyer with everything to lose. Judge Malik looked down at Ibrahim with new respect. You didn't grow up with much, he said, but you carry yourself like someone with more strength than any man in this room. He turned to Mr. Blake. And you brought papers to attack a child's pain. Is this justice to you? Mr. Blake sat down quietly, his voice gone. Ibrahim stood tall. He had no money, no fancy degree, no one to speak for him, but he had truth, and truth was louder than any lie. The courtroom remained silent. No one laughed now. No one doubted Ibrahim anymore, but something still felt unfinished. There was a question in the judge's eyes. A puzzle with one missing piece. Ibrahim sat back down, his breathing steady. The courtroom had heard about his hard life, the fire he survived, the child he once was, left by a railway station, the teenager falsely accused. He had faced every question and answered every insult with truth. But the judge leaned forward again, eyes searching. There's something more, he said softly. I can feel it. Ibrahim looked down at his small file. There was still one last item inside. It was a letter, old, yellowed, folded many times. He had never shown it to anyone before, but something inside him said, now is the time. He stood up again, walked quietly to the judge's bench, and handed it over with two hands. The judge unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was shaky. The paper smelled like smoke and time. He began to read aloud. To the boy who saved me, ... I don't know your name. I don't even know your face, clearly, but you carried me when I could not move. You risked your life in fire and smoke to save mine. I am alive today because of you. If someday you return to this world where people listen, show them this letter. Let them know the truth. That one night, a poor boy with no shoes had more courage than the richest man in the city. May life be kinder to you than it was to me. Signed Rehman Malik. Judge Malik froze. His hands trembled slightly. Name Rehman Malik was his father, the man Ibrahim had saved from the burning building. This wasn't just any letter. This was his father's final letter of gratitude, written but never delivered. His eyes filled with emotion. How did you get this? He asked. Ibrahim said quietly. After the fire, a nurse gave it to me. She said the old man wrote it before leaving the hospital. I've kept it ever since. Mr. Blake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He could feel the case slipping away. Completely now. He had tried everything. Fake power, false stories, public shaming. But he hadn't expected this. A letter written in truth. A bond of bravery between two souls, a poor boy and a dying man. Judge Malik folded the letter gently and placed it beside him like it was made of gold. Then he turned to the courtroom. I want this letter recorded into the court file. He said it will be remembered not for legal reasons, but because justice is not always about rules. Sometimes, it's about remembering who we are as human beings. He looked directly at Mr. Blake. You forgot that? Mr. Blake stood up, trying to fight back. But Your Honor, we still have testimony from the shopkeeper who accused this boy of stealing. That can't be ignored. Double quotes, the judge nodded. You're right. Let's call him in. The door opened. An old man walked in, the shopkeeper from the broken electronics store. But as he entered, he looked unsure. He kept glancing at Ibrahim. The judge asked, do you still stand by your accusation? The shopkeeper hesitated, then said, I'm not sure anymore. The courtroom gasped. I saw the boy running, the man explained. He had something in his hand. But I never saw him break the window. I just assumed. He looked at Ibrahim now, his voice softer. I'm sorry, son. I was scared that night. I judged too fast. Ibrahim didn't say anything. He simply nodded. Even now, he didn't seek revenge, only peace. The judge leaned back in his chair. He looked at the court officers, the reporters, the audience, and finally at Ibrahim. Sometimes, he said, the system fails. But people like this boy, they bring it back to life. He paused. Let the record show. Ibrahim is innocent of all charges, and this court owes him more than just an apology. As the gavel slammed, the room erupted into applause. The same people who had laughed at Ibrahim just hours ago now stood for him. The boy with no name, the boy with no money, the boy with no shoes, had now become the boy with a voice. Outside the courtroom, reporters rushed toward Ibrahim. Do you want to say anything? One asked. Ibrahim paused, then simply said, thank you, Judge Malik, for remembering a moment the world forgot. The judge stood silently by the door, and in that moment, he didn't see a poor boy anymore. He saw a future lawyer, a future leader, a soul born from fire and turned to light. Outside the courtroom, cameras flashed. People gathered to watch the boy they once ignored. Ibrahim stood beside the court steps, quiet, his head slightly bowed. But inside his chest, his heart felt lighter, stronger. He had faced one of the most powerful lawyers in the city and walked out free. But the story wasn't over yet. Inside Judge Malik's office, the judge sat alone, reading the old letter again. His father's words echoed in his mind. One day, show the world what this boy did. Don't forget him. He hadn't forgotten. And now, the world finally knew. But even as the courtroom had cleared, one question still remained. Why was Mr. Blake so eager to win this simple case? What was he hiding? The next morning, something unexpected happened. A woman arrived at the courthouse reception. She wore a long shawl, her eyes tired but sharp. Her name was Sabian, and she said only one thing. I need to speak to the judge. I have something about Mr. Blake and the boy. Judge Malik allowed her into his office. She sat down and took out an old photograph. It showed a group of children, outside a dusty shelter, including one familiar face. Ibrahim. But that wasn't all. Standing behind the children in the photo was a man. The same man now wearing a suit in court. Mr. Blake. The judge narrowed his eyes. Mr. Blake used to visit the shelter. Sabian nodded. Years ago, I worked there. He used to come with volunteers from a legal charity. But he wasn't kind. He treated the children badly. She leaned forward. There's something you should know. He used to take files of children without family, ones with no voice. Judge Malik's voice hardened. Why would he need those? Sabian looked down. Because it made them easier to use, and harder to defend. The judge stood up. Suddenly, things made sense. The missing birth records, the attempt to erase name, the pressure to close the case quickly. Mr. Blake wasn't just defending the shopkeeper, he was hiding something from the past. Something connected to Ibrahim. Judge Malik called for a private hearing. Only a few people were allowed. The judge, himself, Ibrahim, Mr. Blake, Sabian, as the witness, and a court recorder inside the chamber. Tension filled the air. Mr. Blake entered, smiling as always, but his smile dropped when he saw Sabian. Judge Malik began. Mr. Blake, do you recognize this woman? Mr. Blake glanced, then shrugged. No, I don't believe so. She worked at Shelter 9. Blake froze slightly. I visit many charities, he said carefully. That was years ago. The judge placed the photo on the table. Mr. Blake looked directly at Ibrahim's younger face. Still, he said nothing. Then Sabian spoke. Her voice was calm but clear. I remember you. You said no one would care about street kids. You said Disappear every day. No one asks questions. Ibrahim's eyes widened. You said that? He asked softly. Mr. Blake finally snapped. What does any of this prove? He shouted. I did charity work. That's not a crime. The judge's face was stone. But you took advantage of that trust. And when this boy stood in your courtroom, the same child from the shelter you thought would stay silent, you laughed. Silence. Then Judge Malik leaned forward. Ibrahim, do you remember anything else from that shelter? Ibrahim looked uncertain. He closed his eyes, trying to recall. Then he whispered, there was a man. He used to talk in legal words. He once said, change this file, nobody will notice. Sabian nodded. That was him. Mr. Blake's voice was rising now, full of panic. You have no proof. Just memories and photos. But Judge Malik stood up. Maybe today we only have photos and voices, but tomorrow we'll have more. He turned to the recorder. Open an official investigation into Mr. Blake's time at Shelter 9. Every file, every visit, every missing name. Mr. Blake tried to walk out, but 2 officers stood at the door. You're not going anywhere, sir, one said. The man who once laughed at a poor boy now stood frozen, not as a lawyer, but as a suspect. Ibrahim sat silently, processing everything. He wasn't just wrongly accused, he was almost erased. Years ago, by the same man who tried to silence him in court, outside the chamber, the media caught the news quickly. Famous lawyer under investigation for shelter. Corruption teen hero may have uncovered a decade-old scandal. People began arriving outside the court to support Ibrahim. He didn't just win his own case. He had opened the door for justice for many others like him. Judge Malik placed a hand on Ibrahim's shoulder. You didn't come here to fight, but you fought anyway. He smiled gently. And now, we'll make sure no other child is ever silenced like you were. The sun rose slowly over the courthouse the next day. But inside the city, the light of truth was already shining. News of the secret hearing had spread like wildfire. Top attorney, accused of shelter corruption. Street boy's testimony exposes hidden crimes for years. Mr. Blake had walked through courtrooms like a king, but today, he entered not with pride, but with fear. The courtroom was full again. But this time, it wasn't just reporters or lawyers. Many people from the old shelters had come to. Adults, who had once been children at Shelter 9. They sat in the back quietly, waiting to see if justice would finally speak for them. Judge Malik sat tall and calm at the bench. Today, he said, we are not just continuing a case. We are continuing the truth. He looked at Mr. Blake. You have been given a chance to speak, not as an attorney, but as a man. Do you have anything to say before we proceed with testimony? Mr. Blake stood, but the man who once laughed loudly, now spoke in a nervous, shaking voice. All I ever did was try to help, he said. I visited shelters, I worked hard, but I may have made mistakes. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mistakes. Blake looked down. I didn't steal. I didn't hurt anyone. Then he looked toward Ibrahim. I didn't mean to attack you, son. It was just a case. Ibrahim stood slowly. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He just said, you didn't just attack me. You erased my name from records. You tried to bury my truth. He turned toward the courtroom. How many others lost their voices because you decided they didn't matter? Gasps filled the room. One woman stood up. I remember him, she said. I was 11. I was scared. He told me I'd never be adopted, because I was too dark. I cried for days. Another voice came. He laughed at my name, said it was too poor to be real. More people stood up, one after another. Voices once silenced now filled the room. Judge Malik banged his gavel. Silence, please. But in his heart, he knew this was more than a court hearing. This was justice rising from the ground. A court investigator stepped forward. He carried a black folder. Your Honor, he began. We checked Shelter 9's old records. We found 17 missing files between 2010 and 2013. He opened the folder. In each case, the files went missing the week after Mr. Blake's visits. The only person with access to them at the time was him. Mr. Blake's lawyer tried to object, but the judge stopped him. No interruptions. He turned to Blake. This is your chance to tell the truth, or face charges. Mr. Blake said nothing. Sweat covered his forehead. His lips trembled. Then, he sat down. For the first time in his career, he had no words left. Judge Malik looked at the courtroom. Ibrahim was not just a victim of false blame. He was a victim of a broken system, led by the very man meant to protect it. He paused. This court will begin criminal investigation into Mr. Blake's past cases, shelter visits, and false charges. Every voice ignored before will now be heard. Mr. Blake was taken into custody, handcuffed, head low, no applause, no power left. The man who mocked a poor boy was now exposed as the real villain. Outside the court, Ibrahim stepped out into the Sun. Reporters rushed forward. How do you feel? They asked. What's next for you? Ibrahim looked out over the crowd. Behind them stood his brother Sami, smiling proudly. His mother had tears in her eyes, but they were not tears of pain this time. They were tears of hope. I feel free, Ibrahim said quietly, not because they believed me, but because I believed myself. He looked into the cameras. I stood alone once, but not anymore. And I want every kid who feels voiceless to know. Truth takes time. but it always wins. Later that evening, Judge Malik called him into his chambers. He handed Ibrahim a sealed envelope. "What's this?" Ibrahim asked. The judge smiled. "Something my father wanted for you. He never got to give it." Ibrahim opened it. Inside was a handwritten note and a check. The note said, "To the boy who saved my life, this is a start toward building yours." Ibrahim held the paper close. It wasn't just money. It was a promise, a future, a beginning. That night, as the city slept, one small light stayed on. In Sector 9. Ibrahim sat at his small table. He opened a notebook, and he wrote, "One day, I will become a lawyer, not to win cases but to protect the ones no one listens to." The courtroom was filled once again, but this time, it was not for a trial. It was for a message, a final statement from Judge Arman Malik, the man who had watched a poor boy become a symbol of truth, and a powerful attorney fall by his own lies. The audience was quiet. Students, teachers, lawyers, reporters, even people from Sector 9 had come. Ibrahim sat in the front row. Wearing clean clothes for the first time in a long while, his brother Sami sat beside him, holding his hand. The judge entered and stood behind the bench, but this time, he didn't hold a gavel. He held something else. Ibrahim's small file, the one with the newspaper clipping, the burnt photo, and the letter from his father. Judge Malik looked around the room, then he began to speak. "I've spent my whole life in courtrooms," he said. "I've seen criminals walk free. I've seen innocent people go to jail, but rarely have I seen something like this." He held up the photo of Ibrahim carrying the old man from the fire. This boy, a child at the time, saved a stranger. With no reason, he disappeared without asking for praise. And he returned years later, not to brag, but to defend himself when the system failed him. The judge turned slowly to look at Ibrahim. "You could have stayed silent. You could have disappeared again. But you stood tall, and your silence spoke louder than 1,000 lawyers." He then addressed the whole courtroom. "This is not just a story of one boy. This is a story about us, about how quick we are to judge by clothes, by background, by poverty." He walked down from the bench, something judges rarely do, and stood beside Ibrahim. This boy was called a thief. He was mocked, insulted, and blamed. But today, I say this, he is more honest than half the men who wear ties in this room. The courtroom was silent. A few people wiped their eyes. Even lawyers in expensive suits looked down, ashamed. Malik raised his voice gently. "To every child watching this, to every poor person afraid to speak, to every mother working 2 jobs, to every boy who thinks no one hears him, we see you now. And we will not forget again." He handed Ibrahim the file. "I don't know what path you'll choose," he said, "but I hope it's big. Because we need people like you, not just in courts, but in this world." Ibrahim stood up slowly. He didn't know what to say. Boy who had once been voiceless, now had the ears of an entire courtroom. He looked at the judge, then said in a quiet voice, "Thank you for hearing me when no one else would." The judge nodded, then turned back to the courtroom one last time. "Let this case be remembered, not because a lawyer was caught, but because a boy no one believed reminded us what justice truly means." And with that, the session ended. No gavel, no shouting, just silence. The kind of silence that comes after truth has finally been spoken. Outside the courthouse, people waited. Not for scandal, but for inspiration. They didn't cheer like a crowd. They just nodded at Ibrahim as he walked past with respect. Reporters rushed forward, but one young girl, maybe 13, stepped in front. "Are you really going to be a lawyer?" she asked. Ibrahim smiled. "I don't know yet," he replied, "but I'm going to fight for people who can't." The girl smiled back. "My brother's in a shelter too. I'll tell him your story." As Ibrahim walked home that evening, he didn't feel famous. He didn't feel powerful. He felt peaceful, and that was more than enough. Later that night, he sat beside his mother and told her everything. From the courtroom to the judge's speech, from Mr. Blake's fall to the letter from Judge Malik's father, she held his hand tightly. "You were never poor," she whispered. "You just didn't know how rich your heart already was." Outside their small house in Sector 9, the night was calm, but inside that home, a future had already begun. Days passed, then weeks. The court was quiet again, but something had changed, not just in the courtroom, but in the city itself. The story of Ibrahim had spread far and wide. People talked about him in schools, on news, shows, on street corners. Not because he was rich, not because he was famous, but because he stood up with nothing, and still won. Judge Malik received hundreds of letters after the trial. Some were from students, some from lawyers, many from people who had lost hope in justice, until they heard about the boy from Sector 9. And in every message, one thing was clear: Ibrahim reminded us what truth looks like. Meanwhile, Mr. Blake was officially under investigation. Several old shelter cases had been reopened, and more witnesses came forward. Justice was late, but it had finally arrived. Back in Sector 9, Ibrahim's house had not changed much. Still small, still quiet, but the people who passed by now greeted him with respect. "Assalamu alaikum beta, you're the pride of the neighborhood. You made us believe again." One afternoon, a letter arrived for Ibrahim. It was from Judge Malik. The envelope was thick. Inside was a typed letter and a small scholarship certificate. Dear Ibrahim, after all you've been through, you deserve more than just our thanks. You deserve a future. Enclosed is a scholarship, not just for education, but for a life where your voice helps others like you. We believe in you. Now it's time you believe in yourself. Armin Malik. Ibrahim stared at the letter, then looked at his mother. She had tears in her eyes. You've already made me proud, she whispered, but this is your path now. With that scholarship, Ibrahim started attending evening classes during the day. He still worked, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He cleaned, helped, studied, and served tea at the same stall where people once ignored him. Now they asked for advice, for guidance, for help, and he always listened with the same quiet heart. Months passed. One morning, he visited the courthouse again, not as a defendant, not as a victim, but as a guest speaker. He stood in front of law students who had gathered from all across the city. They looked at him with respect. Some took notes. Others just listened, wide-eyed. I used to think my life didn't matter, Ibrahim said, because I had no money, no father, no name. He paused. But now I know something bigger. Even if you have nothing, your truth is always something, and sometimes, that's enough to change the world. The room clapped, some even stood to cheer, but Ibrahim didn't smile out of pride. He smiled because they understood. After the speech, a little boy from the back came up to him. He wore torn slippers and had dust on his face. He held out a small paper, folded 3 times. I don't have a voice, the boy said, but maybe you can speak for me. Ibrahim knelt, opened the note, and read the child's shaky writing. My brother was taken from the shelter. We don't know where. No one helps us. Ibrahim looked the boy in the eyes. You're wrong, he said, gently. You do have a voice. And starting today, I'll help make it louder. That was the moment Ibrahim truly became something more, not just a survivor, not just a fighter, but a light for others still walking in the dark. Back at home that night, he opened his old notebook. On the last page he wrote, ****. I once stood alone in a courtroom, but I didn't fall, because truth stood beside me. And now, I will stand beside it for the rest of my life. ***. The city never forgot his name. After that, because sometimes, one boy with nothing becomes the reason thousands believe again.